Section 15 of Tribal Custom and Anglo-Saxon Law. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tribal Custom and Anglo-Saxon Law by Frederic Seebohm. Chapter 7, Tribal Customs of the Tribes Conquered by Charlemagne. Part 1. 1. The effect upon Virgils of the Nova Moneta. We have reached a point in our inquiry at which it becomes necessary to trouble the reader with further details concerning the changes in the Frankish currency made by Charlemagne. We are about to examine the customs as regards Virgils of those tribes which owed their laws in the shape in which we have them to the conquests of Charlemagne. The alterations in the currency, made literally whilst the laws were in course of construction, naturally left marks of confusion in the text relating to Virgils, and we have to thread our way through them as best we can. The change which we have to try to understand was in the first place a change from a gold to a silver currency, i.e., from the gold currency of Merovingian solidi and tremisses to the silver currency of Charlemagne's Nova Moneta. There had been a certain amount of silver coinage in circulation before, but the mass of the coinage had been hitherto gold, mostly in gold tremisses. In all the Frankish laws hitherto examined, the monetary unit was the gold solidus with its third, the tremisses, and the only question was whether the solidi and tremisses were of imperial or of Merovingian standard, whether the solidus was the Merovingian solidus of 86.4 wheat grains, and the tremisses of 28.8, or the imperial solidus of 96 wheat grains and the tremisses 32. As regards the lex salica, originally the solidus was probably of the imperial standard, because the Merovingian kings at first in their coinage copied the imperial coins both in type and weight, and before they issued a coinage of their own, they made use of imperial coins, both gold and silver. Numismatics point in illustration of this to the fact in the tomb of Childeric at Tournai were found no Frankish coins, but a large number of Roman coins, gold and silver, of dates from AD 408 to those of the contemporary Emperor Leo I, 457 to 474. And for proof that these Roman coins were afterwards imitated by Merovingian princes, Monsieur Maurice Preux had only to refer the student to every page of his catalogue of Les Monnaies Merovingiennes. Now, if the gold solidus was at first of 96 wheat grains, then the denarius, 1/40th, would be 2.4 wheat grains of gold, and at a ratio of 1 to 10. The denarius would be the scripulum of 24 wheat grains of silver, which was called by early metrologists the denarius gallicus. Further, at 1 to 12 the denarius would become the Merovingian silver tremisses of 28.8, so that probably the denarius of the lex salica may originally have been the scripulum, and under later Merovingian kings their own silver tremisses. Thus these silver tremisses had probably been regarded as the denarius of the lex salica for a century or two at least before Charlemagne's changes. Up to this time, therefore, there was apparently a distinct connection between the reckoning and figures of the lex salica and the actual Frankish coinage. The Merovingian coinage of gold and silver tremisses of 28.8 wheat grains was therefore, from this point of view, so to speak, a tribal coinage of the Franks themselves, but not one adapted for currency, over a worldwide empire such as Charlemagne had in view, and with which, at last, when adopting the title of emperor, he had practically to deal. The changes he made in the currency were intimately connected, not only in time but in policy, with the extension of his kingdom and his ultimate assumption of the imperial title. His raising of the weight of the Frankish gold tremisses and silver denarius from the Merovingian standard of 28.8 to the imperial standard of 32 wheat grains, was probably the result of his conquest of Italy. He seems to have arranged it with the Pope, but they issued silver denarii of the higher standard with the impress of both their names upon them. It was natural that he should wish his coinage to obtain currency throughout his dominions, and this could not be expected if it was continued at a lower standard from that of the Byzantine emperor. Not only in the currency, but also in other matters, extended empire involved the breaking down of tribal peculiarities and greater uniformity in legal provisions and practice. To mention one instance suggested by our previous inquiry, we have noticed how the extension of Frankish rule in Gaul, from the Loire to the Garonne, increased the difficulties of maintaining two laws as to land. Strangers under Roman law, as in the De Migrantibus, one by one were settling among Franks holding allods of family holdings of terra salica. Extended conquest reversed the process, and in conquered provinces immigrants living under Salic law became strangers amongst Vicini living under Roman, Burgundian, or Visigothic law. The family holdings of terra salica must have now become the exception and not the rule. This becomes evident in the provisions made for the army. In the Capitulary of A.D. 803, the Exercitu Promovendo, it was ordered that every freeman, liber homo, was de proprio suo, or as a benefice, had 4 mansi vestiri, that is, mansi occupied by tenants, should equip himself and attend in hostum, and those not having so many mansi were to club together so that for every 4 mansi a soldier should be found. The possession of mansi had apparently become sufficiently general to be taken as the typical form of landholding. In A.D. 807, special arrangements were made for the case of the recently conquered Frisians and Saxons. If help should be needed in Spain, every 5 of the Saxons were to equip a 6th. If the need arose nearer home, every 2 were to prepare a 3rd. Or if the need arose still closer at hand, all were to come. Of the Frisians, counts and vassals and those who held benefices, all were to come. And of those who were poor, every 6 were to equip a 7th. There is no mention of mansi in the case of the Saxons and Frisians. The Capitulary of A.D. 803 seems to show that in the longer settled districts of the empire, the possession of so many mansi, de proprio suo, was the prevalent form of land ownership, so that, although the Lex Salica remained still in force, the number of Franks living under it seems by this time to have borne a very small proportion to those living under Roman and other laws. Family holdings under the Lex Salica were, however, probably not quite extinct. In the Capitula Generalia of A.D. 825 was inserted the following clause providing specially for family holdings, which may possibly have been holdings of terra salica, though it is not so directly stated. De fratibus nanci, qui sumul in paterna, sius materna hereditati communitur virunt, nolenti substantiam illorum dividere, hac occasione, et unus tantum eorum in hostum vadet, voluntas et si solicit vadat, si autem duo sunt scimitar, si tres furent, unus remanit, et si ultra tres numerus fratum creverit, unus semper proper domesticatum, curum adic rerum communiam excolientum remanat, si ferro inter eos alica, or deferit contentio, qui eorum expendiotum fecere debiat, prohibibus, ut nemo illorum remanat, in aetata, quoque illorum lex propria servitor, similiter et in nepotibus, eorum hec conditio teneratur. Concerning brothers who together live in common in the paternal or maternal inheritance, unwilling to divide their substance, when occasion comes that one of them only should go in hostum. We will that if there be one only, he should go, and if there be two, the same. If there be three, let one remain, and if the number of brothers grows to more than 3, let one always remain on account of domestic care and to attend to their common concerns. But if among them any contention shall have arisen, which of them ought to go on the expedition, we prohibit that any of them shall remain. During their lives also, let the lex propria be preserved. In the same way, let this condition be kept to even among their grandsons. When we reflect that the Franks living under the lex Salica must have thus sunk into a small minority, it becomes obvious that wider views must of necessity have entered into the minds of Charlemagne and his advisers, not only as regards land, but also as regards the currency. The currency of the lex Salica, with its solidity of 40 denarii, was, as has been said, after all, a local one, and outside the old Frankish boundary in the Visigothic region, as well as probably in Italy, the Roman currency or local modifications of it apparently more or less prevailed. Ecclesiastics, as we have seen, even Alcuin himself, still used the terms of Roman currency in writing on monetary matters to their friends outside the empire. To them the denarius was still the Roman drachma of 72 wheat grains of silver, commonly called the argentius, in contrast to the gold solidus or aureus. Gregory of Tours, when he has occasion to mention monetary payments, speaks of aurii, trientis, and argenti. In one story he speaks of solidi, trientis, and argenti. Further, in a supplement to the laws of the Visigoths is a statement under the name of Womboresque, A.D. 672 to 680, which apparently represents the monetary system in vogue south of the Frankish boundary. It states that the pound of gold equals 72 gold solidi, so that the gold solidus was not the Merovingian solidus, but that of Constantine. It then states that the drachma of gold, 12 argentii, the argentius being the silver drachma, the ratio of gold to silver was 1 to 12. To Isidore of Seville, from his Spanish standpoint, the silver drachma was still the denarius. Drachma octava pe uncio et denari pondus argenti, tribus constant scripulus. The drachma is the 8th part of an ounce in the weight of the silver denarius, containing 3 scripula. Solidus apud latinus, alia nomini sextula dicitur, quod exex ansia caplitur, hunc et diximus, vulgus aureum, solidum vocat, cucus tertium partum, ideo dixerent, tertinem. The solidus with the Romans is otherwise called the sextula, because it is 1/6 of an ounce. Hence, as we have said, the vulgar call the solidus the aureus, the 3rd part of which is called the trimissus. Thus the solidus was the typical gold unit or aureus, and the drachma was the silver denarius or argentius. It is remarkable that, at a ratio of 1 to 10, 12 Visigothic or Roman argentii, or drachmas of silver equaled exactly in wheat grains, the Merovingian gold solidus current on the Frankish side of the Garonne or the Loire. It would seem, then, probable that traditionally, and according to ancient custom, outside the Frankish kingdom, the Merovingian gold solidus had been equated with 12 silver argenti or denarii of this reckoning, whilst within Frankish limits 40 of the silver trimissus, and now of the pence of the Nova Monete, was reckoned as equal to the gold solidus of the lex Salica. But even to the Frank, the 40 denarii of the lex Salica may have become antiquated except for vergels and other payments under its provisions. The practice apparently had already grown up of reckoning 12 of the silver trimissus as a solidus of silver, 20 of which were to the pound of 240 pence, without, however, any pretense being made that this solidus of 12 silver pence was to be reckoned as equal to the gold solidus in making payments. In the Capitulari Lieutenancy of AD 743, a payment is enacted de unicacica sata solidus. It asked 12 denarii. It was necessary to make this explanation. It is not known how much earlier the practice of reckoning in pounds of silver of 20 solidi of 12 denarii came into vogue, but it was long before the issue of the nova monetae. It might at first sight be thought that these 12 denarii may have been 12 argenti, or drachmae, but 240 drachmae would make far more than a pound, and by an edict of AD 765, Pippin had enacted that out of a pound of silver not more than 22 solidi were to be made, one of which was to go to the monetarius, and this clearly forbids the supposition that the solidus could be of 12 drachmae. The pound would contain only 8 such solidi. Another capitulary of AD 779 proves that the 12 denarii were Merovingian denarii of 28.8 wheat grain. The issue of the new denarii at 32 wheat grains was apparently made before AD 781, for in that year an edict was passed forbidding the currency of the old denarii. There was nothing very remarkable in this raising of the silver denarius from 28.8 to 32 wheat grains. It was merely adopting the imperial standard. But the extraordinary thing was that Charlemagne seems to have thought that he could, by law, substitute the solidus of 12 of his silver denarii for the gold solidus hitherto in use. The gold currency was going out and the silver currency was taking its place. But it was quite another thing to make the solidus of 12 silver denarii of 32 wheat grains legal tender in the place of the gold solidus of the lex salica of 40 silver denarii of 28.8 wheat grains. Yet this was what Charlemagne did, though perhaps only by degrees. The change was made under the pretense of the sanction of ancient custom, in the addition made to Title 36 of the Ripuarian Law. The wording of the clause as to the payment of vergels was, quodsi cum duargento silvere contigerit, pro solito duodecim denarios, sicut antiquitas et constitutum, and this allusion to antiquity was repeated. What was meant by this appeal to ancient custom is not easy to see, unless it might be the probably long-established equation already mentioned between 12 Roman drachma or argenti and the Merovingian gold solidus. Very possibly this equation was older than that of the 40 denarii to the solidus of the lex salica. In a series of remarkable articles contributed to the Forschungen zur deutschen Geschichte of 1862, Dr. Ad Sottbier endeavored to show, and with considerable force, that the introduction into the lex salica of the round numbers of denarii, 40 to the solidus, was of comparatively late date, and if this hypothesis be correct, then it may be that Charlemagne was appealing to an earlier Frankish custom of reckoning 12 silver denarii, or drachmae, to the gold solidus. But even if it could be so, obviously the denarii of 12 to the solidus of ancient custom cannot have been the same denarii as those which afterwards were reckoned at 40 to the solidus. Economically speaking, the substitution of the solidus of 12 denarii for the gold solidus, if they had been Roman drachmae, would have been reasonable and might have made no change in prices. But the substitution of 12 of the new denarii of 32 wheat grains for the 40 denarii of 28.8 wheat grains, involving a ratio between gold and silver of 1:4, could only be justified by such a scarcity of silver as would prevent a rise in prices. That it was not so, justified, became very soon apparent. Following the order of date, the capitulary of AD 785, De Partibus Saxioni, shows that prices when quoted in the solidus of 12 pence immediately rose. The ox, the traditional value of which was 2 gold solidi, is reckoned as worth 10 silver solidi, and Monsieur Girard has shown from the various instances given in the Politique de Hermanon that on the estates of the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the price of oxen remained at an average of 8 silver solidi long after the death of Charlemagne. The Lex Salica continued in force with all its fines and vergels stated in gold solidi of 40 denarii, and a capitulary of A.D. 801 contains the following section, which reveals the beginning of confusion. Ut omnes solutia atqui compositio, qui in legis salica continenter, inter francos per duodecim denariorum solidus compodatur, excepto Hubi contentio contra Saxony, et Frison exorta fuit ibi volumus et 40 denarium quantitatem solidus habeat quem vel Saxo vel Frisio et partum Solici Franci cum eo litigantis solvere debit, that every payment and composition which is contained in the Lex Salica between Franks shall be paid by solidi of 12 pence, except that where a dispute has risen up against Saxons and Frisians, we will that the solidus shall be of the amount of 40 pence, which either a Saxon or a Frisian ought to pay to a Salic Frank at law with him. In A.D. 803, a clause was inserted in capitulary to the effect that all debts to the king should be paid in solidi of 12 denarii, except a frida qui in legis Salica scriptus sunt. This looks like a general reservation of the fines and vergels of the Lex Salica, but it does not seem to have been so intended, or perhaps there was vacillation in the councils of the emperor. A capitulary of A.D. 816 contained the following: De omnius debitus solventus sicut antiquitas fuit constitutum, per duodecim denario solidus salvator, per totum salicum legem, excepto ludus, si saxo ut fristo salicum auxerit, per 40 denarios solvent solidum, infra salicos vera ex altric, parti in omnibus debitus sicut diximus 12 denarii per solidum solvantur, civi de homoditis, civi in omnibus rebus. In the payment of all debts according to ancient custom, the solidus shall be paid by 12 denarii throughout the Salic law, except in the case of vergels. If a Saxon or Frisian shall kill a Salic Frank, let the solidus be paid by 40 denarii. Among Salic Franks, however, on both sides as to all debts, as we have said, 12 denarii shall be paid for the solidus, whether in the case of homicides or anything else. As between Salic Franks, therefore, the solidus of 12 denarii was to be the legal tender in payments of vergels and everything else. This was all very well for debtors, but it was not so satisfactory to creditors. The exception that, when a Frank was killed by a Saxon or a Frisian, the vergels were still to be paid in the solidus of 40 denarii, was an admission that to receive it in solidi of 12 denarii would have been a hardship. And as to the general public, the acceptance of payment of debts in the denarii of the nova moneta had to be secured by penalties. A clause was introduced into the capitulary of A.D. 794, according to which freemen refusing the new denarii were to be fined 15 solidi, whilst servi refusing them were to be publicly beaten naked at a post. The permanent result was very remarkable. The new currency was maintained as legal tender in France, and the gold currency practically disappeared. Charlemagne and his successors coined very few more gold solidi and tremises. King Arthur, and after him Alfred, raised the English guillet to the penny of 32 wheat grains, probably in imitation of the nova moneta, and Charlemagne's pound of 240 of these pence, i.e., of 7,680 wheat grains of silver, became generally recognized as the pound of monetary reckoning in Western Europe. So far, Charlemagne triumphed, but in the meantime, the artificial ratio of 1 to 4, sought to be established between gold and silver, could not be maintained. The pound of silver remained the standard in accounts, but one of Charlemagne's successors restored the imperial ratio of 1 to 12, and enacted that the pound of pure gold should no longer be sold at any other price than 12 pounds of silver. The date of the edict by which this restoration of the old ratio was secured was A.D. 864. These were the changes in the currency which took place during the period of the formation of the Lex Versonium and Lex Saxonum, which we have next to examine. No wonder that they should have introduced confusion and alterations in the text of the various clauses, and in order that we may be able to feel our way through them, it now only remains that we should realize the actual difference between the amount of silver in the 40 denarii of the solidus of the Lex Salica and the amount of silver in the 12 denarii of the new solidus of the Nova Moneta, which had thenceforth to take its place as legal tender in the payment of debts and vergels. In the first place, we know that the denarius of the Nova Moneta was a silver penny of 32 wheat grains, so that Charlemagne's solidus of 12 silver pence contained 384 wheat grains of silver. In the next place, whatever the denarii of the Lex Salica may originally have been, we know that the Merovingian silver denarii, which had long been current in France and England, were of the same weight as the Merovingian gold tremisses, viz. 28.8 wheat grains. 40 of these would contain 1,152 wheat grains of silver, i.e., exactly 3 times as much silver as the 12 denarii of the Nova Moneta, so that if a vergeld were paid in silver, it could now be paid in exactly 1/3 of the weight of silver hitherto required under the Salic law, and so of every other debt. Finally, not only was the ratio between gold and silver disturbed, but also the ratio between money and cattle, and this was an important matter in the payment of vergels, for, as we have seen, the normal vergeld was 100 head of cattle. Obviously, vergels would no longer be paid, as of old, either in gold or in cattle, when they could be paid at 1/3 of the value in silver. In framing new laws representing the old customs of the newly conquered Frisians and Saxons, the question would certainly arise whether the vergels were to be stated in the equivalent of their old customary value in cattle, or reduced to 1/3 of their old value by retaining the traditional number of solidi, as if they were still of the gold value. We have seen that Frisians and Saxons were exceptionally dealt with, but they had now become a part of the empire, and, with the best intentions, how was the framer of their laws to describe the ancient vergels which had hitherto been paid in gold solidi or in cattle? No one of the courses open to him would be without its difficulties. He might record the customary vergeld as still to be paid in gold solidi, in which case the vergeld would be 3 times that of neighboring tribes, who could now pay their vergels in silver. Or he might divide the amount of the ancient vergeld by 3, so as to reduce it to the lower level, in which case the number of animals in which, by long custom, the vergeld had been paid, would be worth 3 times the vergeld payable in gold. These would be the alternatives if the payment in gold were continued, and never as yet in any of the laws had the vergeld been stated otherwise than in gold. There was only one other way open to the legislator, if he wished to keep up the old customary values, viz., to translate the gold values at the old ratio into the new silver solidi, that is, to treble the gold figures of the ancient customary vergels and make them payable in silver solidi. This would probably be the best course if he wished to continue the old relation of the vergels to the animals, in which they had hitherto been mostly paid. But then it might be difficult to enforce the payment of vergels in silver in districts where the currency was still gold. The legislator would, in any case, have to make up his mind whether to lower the ancient virgils of the newly conquered tribes to a third of what they had been, or to keep up the value of the virgils and the number of cattle in which they had from time immemorial been paid. The virgeld in the popular tribal mind was a thing so fixed and so sacred that the makers of the lex Vercenium and the lex Suexerum were almost certain to find themselves between the horns of a dilemma. End of section 15.